Now we're going to continue solving systems, but this time the equations may not be linear. In other words, the variables x, y, etc. might be squared or cubed. So you're going to have some curves in your graph, and so you may have more than one solution. And we'll also look at the graphs to confirm our answers. So for example, if you have 3x minus y equals -2 as the first equation, and the second equation is 2x squared minus y equals 0. Okay, so this first equation actually is linear. I can tell that because there's just an x and a y, and both of them are raised to the first power, right? So that's going to create a line. The second equation has an x squared and then just a single y. So that's going to create a parabola, okay? So I can still use substitution or elimination when I'm solving these. So the method doesn't really change, but I do need to kind of think about which variable would make the most sense to eliminate. So for example, if I thought I might want to eliminate x, well, how do I do that? Because I have an x and I also have an x squared, right? So if I tried to use elimination by adding the two equations together, I mean, that wouldn't really help to get rid of the x's. So if I use substitution and I solve for this x and plugged it in here, then I'm thinking, gosh, that might work, but I would have to square whatever was in there. That sounds like it would be hard. However, if I look at the y's, okay, I could pretty easily eliminate the y's, and then I would just have an equation in terms of x that I should be able to solve. Okay, so let's do that. We're going to use elimination. Sure, we'll use elimination. I think this problem, if you think about it, you could use substitution or elimination quite easily, right? Because these y's are also easy to solve for. So if you use substitution, you would just solve for one of the y's and then plug that information into the other equation. That would actually be really easy too, right? So if we're going to use elimination though, all we have to do is maybe multiply this second equation by -1 to get opposite coefficients for the y. So if we do that, we have 3x minus y equals -2, and then -2x squared plus y is equal to 0. All right, add those two equations together. 3x minus 2x squared, the y's will eliminate, is equal to -2. Okay, now if you take a look at this, we have an x term and an x squared term. So to solve this, don't just throw out every piece of algebra you ever thought of. It's just a quadratic, so your choices are factoring or the quadratic formula. Either one is a great way to do it, but you've got to use one of those. Any other thing isn't really gonna work for you. All right, so personally, I like to factor. So if I want to factor, I actually want to do a couple things to this equation first to make it easier. So I'm going to multiply this equation by -1 again, because I don't want my first term, the -2x squared, I don't want that to be negative. So if I multiply by -1, I get -3x plus 2x squared is equal to 2. Now, of course, I'm going to rearrange the terms so that the right side of the equation is equal to 0. And I'm going to put my 2x squared first. So 2x squared minus 3x and then minus 2 to bring the 2 over to the other side. Okay, so again, you kind of have to do all these steps whether you're going to factor or use the quad formula. But right here at this point, you have two choices, factor, quad formula. And I've seen in your work, I've seen both used successfully, okay? Either one is totally fine. All right, so let's see if we can factor this thing. So we have, let's see, the first term has to be 2x squared, so it's 2x times x makes 2x squared. The last term has to be -2, so that is either 1 and 2 or 2 and 1. and you're just going to guess and check and see which one it is. If you have other factoring methods you usually use, please feel free, as long as they're successful. So what I do is I just check. So I'm going to say, well, this is my outer term, and that would be a that would be a 4x, and my inner term here would be a 1x. So if I made this number negative, right, that would be negative 4x. That will add to negative 3x in the middle. So then this one is positive. So that was the correct guess. So it wasn't really that hard to find the factors. All right, so now that we have the factors, we know that 2x plus 1 is equal to 0, or x minus 2 is equal to 0. So that makes 2x equal to negative 1 divided by 2. X is equal to negative 1/2. And then here x is equal to 2. Okay, so we have 2x solutions. Most likely that means we have 2 points where the graph is intersecting, but we do need to plug these x's back into one of the equations and find what the y value is. Okay, and really we should probably plug it back into the other equation too and make sure it works in the other equation, because it probably will in this case, but sometimes you may get what's called extraneous solutions. All right, so to find y, if x is equal to negative 1/2, okay, let's just plug that into the first equation, I think. So 3 times negative 1/2 minus y equals negative 2. Okay, so that's negative 3/2 minus y equals negative 2. Let's add 3/2 to both sides. I'm going to do this in my head, I think. So negative y equals, this is negative 2, this is positive 1/2. So that's negative 1/2. Okay, divide by a negative, so y is equal to 1/2. Okay, that is 1 point on our graph, negative 1/2, comma 1/2. That's x comma y. Okay, now for the other point on the graph, let's see, x equals 2. So when x equals 2, let's plug that in. 3 times 2 minus y is equal to negative 2. So that's 6 minus y equals negative 2. And then negative y equals negative 8. So y equals 8. So the other answer, the other solution on the graph is 2 comma 8. Okay, now before we go, I want to show you something really cool that I think you should use. So let me flip over to this. Yes, okay. So I hope you've tried using Desmos.com at some point for graphing. You can use this on your computer, Desmos.com, or there's actually a nice phone app for it too. Just search up the Desmos app. They are free and there are no ads, which is pretty unusual, right? But it's like a nonprofit company and it is really an awesome graphing tool. So even though you should have graphing calculators and you should use those on quizzes and tests and such, this is a great little handheld graph, and in some ways it's easier to use than your TI-84, so much easier, really. So for one thing, I want you to notice, this is a blessing. When you type in the equations, you don't have to solve them for y. So if you go to Desmos.com and you say start graphing, you get this screen. I just came over here to the left. I typed in the first equation. Just as written. I did not solve it for y. Second equation, same thing. I just typed it as written. Okay. Now I got this lovely graph that I can, whoops, I'm touching the graph. I can zoom in and zoom out on. Another cool feature, if you put your cursor near an intersection, it will tell you what that intersection is. And if you click on it, it'll keep a little label there. So remember, one of our answers was 2 comma 8. That's one of them. And the other answer was negative 1/2, positive 1/2. Okay, so there we are. So it's a really simple graphing tool. It's not a great regular calculator. It really is mostly wonderful for graphs. So I encourage you to check all your answers using Desmos, especially these nonlinear systems.